Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the 3 C's of workplace change, leading with communication, connection, and clarity. Presented by Mika Cross and brought to you by IFMA's Corporate Facilities Council. Please be aware that this webinar is being recorded and you are muted to prevent background noise during the presentation. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them in the questions box, and if time permits, Mika will answer questions at the end of the presentation. I also want to let you know that Mika wants to make this presentation as interactive as possible. So there may be moments where Mika asks you to either raise your hand using the raise your hand function, and we'll send you an unmute request. Or there may be times where Mika asks you to put your thoughts in the chat or in the questions box. So at that time, don't be afraid to interact with us. If you're willing to be unmuted and to speak out loud, you can raise your hand with that function. And if not, feel free to type your thoughts as well. We'd love to hear them. I now turn you over to Dexter Barrow, the Programs Committee Chair for the Corporate Facilities Council.
Hi, everyone, and thank you again for joining our CFC Monthly Wednesday webinar series. What a way to get the month started. We'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, SenseFix, eStructurer, and Tersano, who helped to bring this amazing content to you month after month. And we'd like to give a big shout out to Wayne Weitzel for being a champion for the CFC. And now, without further ado, our speaker today is Mika Cross. She is an international speaker, workplace expert, and leader in transforming employment and flexible work programs. Mika is widely recognized for her ability to bridge strategy with practical solutions that drive real impact. As a proud Army veteran, Mika brings over 2 decades of civil service experience from agencies like the U.S. Intelligence Community, the Office of Personnel Management, the Department of Agriculture, and the Department of Labor, among others. She has also served as a VP of Employee Engagement at FlexJobs before founding her own veteran-owned small business, Strategy at Work. Mika's insights have helped to shape workforce policies at the highest levels. She is a sought-after expert witness for the Senate Oversight and Reform Committee and a leading voice on the future of work. Today, she's here to share her expertise and help us navigate the evolving workplace with clarity, connection, and purpose. Without further ado, Mika, we're looking forward to this.
Thank you, Dexter. Thank you so much for that kind introduction, and to you, Kylie, as well. And thanks to all of you for joining us today for this community conversation, I'd like to think of it as. One of the things that Dexter, I think, left off my bio is that I'm also a proud mom of 2 Gen Z graduates in 2025. So it's just such a pleasure to be here with you today. And for all of us to be thinking about what we can be doing to create communication, clarity, and connection in today's workforce for our future generation of workers, like my 2 recent graduates. Because let's be honest, today's workforce wants more than just good coffee and pizza parties in the break room. They want clarity, not confusion. They want communication that's honest, human, and two-way, not just one way. And maybe most of all, they want a sense of belonging and meaning and understanding that their work and the time that they invest in your workplaces matter. So that's why we're all here today, right? Because in this interactive roundtable, we're unpacking the 3 C's of workplace change: culture, communication, and connection. And so as a facility manager or as a manager or leader of people, you're not just managing spaces and places anymore, right? You're shaping experiences. You're creating the conditions for trust, performance, and delivering exceptional results. So before we dive in, I just want to let you know this is going to feel a little bit different. This is meant to be a chatty, interactive, engaging conversation. Again, Kylie mentioned it's meant to be about you and for you. So feel free to weigh in the chat, Raise your hand. She'll bring you off mute if you have something to add. And then we'll ask some questions at the end as well. We're going to design our conversation around some workforce insights and trends just to highlight things that any leader in today's workplace needs to know about when we're thinking about designing the premier workplace experience. And then we're going to dig into some tactics, some tools that you can use, some actionable strategies, and also, I hope, highlight some best and promising practices and things that work well for you in leading your teams today. But before we get started, I'd love to invite you to just think for a moment, and you can drop this in chat, or you can come off mute if you feel most comfortable to do so. But if you could wave a magic wand to solve one workplace challenge in your workplace today, what would it be? And Kylie, here's where I'm going to call on you to either chime in and give me an answer of what you think, but also if you see anything interesting, surprising, fun, or maybe not even something that's surprising that's coming in through the chat. Let me know what you're seeing.
Yes, ma'am. And so as y'all are typing, remember, if you'd rather just unmute and say it out loud, the hand raised button is in the lower left corner of your screen. So press that and I can take you off mute. To answer for myself, Mika, I feel like one workplace challenge that I think about a lot and I'd want solved is the siloing of it all. How every department is great at what they do and they have really great insight and want to work together, but especially being mostly work from home for all of IFMA, we're very siloed and I wish that those connections could be deeper in those threads that we pull together.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you're definitely not alone. You know, that sense of connection, that sense of belonging and sense of meaning in terms of being a part of a team and understanding what I call it the right flank and left flank from my Army days are doing is so incredibly important. Anything else coming in through the chat?
Not yet, but don't be shy, y'all. We want to hear your thoughts.
Yes,
So give us a few more moments, maybe warm,
absolutely. And
maybe we
maybe I'm
will
gonna
warm.
prompt you even more for a moment. So just indulge me for a minute. And maybe think about if we were coming together in the year 2030 and your workplace or your team, your organization landed on the cover, now it's digital, right? But of your favorite business publication, what would your headline story say? And what is the story that that headline is saying about your workplace? And maybe even a step further, what might you think about that you would have done in the year 2025? Or that you changed or that you created to land your workplace on that business publication, or maybe even winning a workplace award. So just think about that as we navigate today's conversation. You don't necessarily have to answer it. You can just jot it down, think about it to yourself, because we're going to be building this vision together as we look at some important workplace trends and insights from workplaces all around the globe. Now, company culture is absolutely having a watershed moment. It is the top reasons why job seekers will apply to a job, but also why they won't accept a job in today's job market. Job seekers find out more about your company before they even put pen to paper. Now in the digital environment, there's no pen to paper. But what I can tell you is that job announcements and job postings that cite positive company culture and describe what it feels like to work there see an almost 70% increase, according to LinkedIn Global Talent Trends report, in candidate engagement, as opposed to job announcements that do not mention company culture. And what you see on this slide are the top reasons why job seekers won't apply or accept a job when it comes to culture. Bad bosses, yep, through the rumor mill. They get that information through social networking on LinkedIn, Glassdoor. They are also peeking at those awards and accolades that your workplaces may have earned, those headline stories that we just talked about. Low salary, or maybe no transparency in starting salary. That's another top reason. No remote or flexible work at all is, of course, in the top 4 reasons why candidates aren't looking to apply for jobs in any workplace, in any industry, and in any occupation. So company culture really is a top seller. Why does it matter? Because over the past 5 years, we have seen the highest rates in history of job seekers who already are in jobs. They're already gainfully employed, looking for something more. They are changing jobs at the highest rates that we have seen over the last 5 years. And in the US alone, the height during the pandemic and after was close to 30% of workers in corporations and companies like yours who are on the market looking for a new job. You might wonder which employees are walking away. Well, it's not the best news for employers, right? Because actually the majority of professionals under the age of 60 are ready to leave for the right opportunity. And this really is important for things like profitability, competition, customer experience, and designing workplaces that drive exceptional results. Because if churn and attrition is at higher levels, it leaves, guess what? Those of us who are left behind with more work to do, which can also lead to workplace stress, workplace anxiety, and I'm sure we've all heard about the phenomenon of workplace burnout in our workplaces today. So these things really matter for us to be thinking about. In fact, a FlexJobs survey during and post-pandemic indicated that job seekers and employees that are currently employed are facing what I call a cultural conundrum. There's such misalignment between what workers want when they expect good and frequent communication that's clear from leadership. They feel as though there's a misalignment between what the employer and organization is offering and what they need when it comes to flexibility, a supportive workplace, what it means to create inspired, healthy, thriving workplaces that drive results and enhance productivity. And they're also seeing a disconnect between what they consider effective management and supportive workplaces that even offer mental health support. And we look at our frontline workers. These are the desk line workers that might not necessarily be working from a traditional office. The majority of frontline workers from the 2025 WorkVivo Frontline Worker Report indicate that they aren't even certain that their own company culture applies to them. It's almost 100%. And nearly half of frontline workers do not even know who their CEO is. So when we think about the impacts of communication, connection, and clarity when it comes to our leadership skills, this all drives healthy, productive cultures that people can feel as though they're being able to deliver their best work. And if you don't believe me that culture matters, just take a page out of The Most Magical Place on Earth. Because year after year, with exorbitant costs, rising prices, crying kids, long lines, Disney typically outperforms its competitors. And they do that because they invest on day one in making sure that they have workplaces that are aligned, that there is role clarity, and that there is an exceptional employee experience first from day one, which translates over into exceptional customer experience. And Forbes research shows that companies and organizations that thrive at customer experience have employees who are 1.5 times more engaged. So these same companies with high rates of engagement are outperforming their competitors by nearly 150%. So this really does affect the bottom line. Now, coming out of the pandemic, workers are really demanding a lot of different things from their employers. They're establishing new relationships with work, they're redefining new values, and they're looking for new ways of working. In fact, work-life balance is now trumping bank balance when it comes to the things that job seekers are looking for. So these are the top 3 areas that workers are searching for in their job search: work-life balance and flexibility, compensation, pay and benefits, but also look at this: colleagues and culture. 40% of job seekers are searching actively for cultures where they can see a fit for. And this is because it really affects everyone. Coming out of the pandemic, workers really now are searching for more meaning, for more life with their work life, and alignment when it comes to values and passion-driven work, purpose-driven work. And this is where it comes into play. The other thing to consider, and I mentioned this earlier, is just to be aware of the impacts of workplace burnout when we're thinking about healthy, thriving cultures, clarity of communication, the impact of connection, and how that drives retention and employee engagement overall. Because the World Health Organization defines worker burnout as a direct impact of occupational stress that's been unmanaged. It can lead to feelings of exhaustion and physical manifestations that reduce productivity, lead to absenteeism, increased disengagement, which is an active driver of a low productivity and performance. You may see this play out when you see people maybe having this sense of languishing. Maybe you're seeing someone that typically might be optimistic, becoming short-tempered over a long period of time with coworkers and clients. And then again, those unexplained physical symptoms, it could lead to other issues when we're thinking about worker productivity. In fact, workplace burnout is such an imperative for workplaces everywhere to consider that over the last few years, even the nation's top medical officer, the US Surgeon General, put out in the United States a national call to action for all workplaces to be aware of the issues affecting workers everywhere when it comes to mental health, well-being, and worker burnout. So when we think about how we can create collaborative, connected cultures that drive engagement, performance, and productivity, strategic communications is absolutely at the top of the list. Now, Gallup's most recent global workplace study found that over 50% of workers in very high pressure cultures experience what's called the sense of psychological threat states. And psychological threat states, these reduce things like innovation, creativity. They trigger cortisol spikes, again, that workplace stress over time. If unmanaged, that leads to burnout, and it increases conformity. And in workplaces just like yours, what we're seeing play out as an impact to this is that there are many, many workers who feel disengaged, who feel unattached, who feel that communication is becoming more of a monologue than a dialogue. We're seeing innovation die and creativity dip. And in workplaces like these, what happens when you're thinking about your own teams is that your team, if you're experiencing these kinds of symptoms and signals in the workplace, actually mirrors your panic and not your vision for performance and productivity and driving results. So I think it's safe to say that our teams, and maybe ourselves as leaders, right? You as leaders and managers need a recharge. And we need to understand how we can refuel and recharge the batteries on our teams as well. And that's where the 3 C's come into play. Those signs and signals that batteries may be low in yourself, in your peers, in your team members, in your organizations, is when you start to see that trust is eroding, people aren't speaking up as more as they used to. Maybe if you look on the slide here, the culture might feel what I call hollow. Again, very transactional. And I'm getting a lot of requests from workplaces everywhere to invest in leadership development that focuses on getting unstuck. And so this is a really important facet of the modern workplace to be considering how we can create inspired workplaces through clarity of communication that really drive those connections, results, and impact. So I want to ask you, and you can maybe raise your emoticon hand or chime in. Have you ever noticed what I call the say-do gap? maybe you've heard people say, or it's in your strategic plan, or your CEO or leader might say things like, we are people first. We invest in our people. However, workloads keep increasing, attrition keeps soaring, and maybe burnout is somewhat ignored. You might hear things like, we pledge open communication, we value feedback, we want to hear from you. But what happens when employees, workforce, yourself gives that feedback? Is it ignored or is it acted upon? You start to see trust eroding. And what about career paths? Is there a clear, transparent pathway for people to understand how good work can lead to advancement and opportunity in your workplace? Our career growth paths talked about? Maybe they're not seen though, maybe they're not understood. There can be a big disconnect. And again, that's the say-do gap. So where to start when we're thinking about re-energizing high-performing teams? Again, it's clear expectations and effective communication. We're going to get into tactics, and I'm going to invite you to help play along too. It comes with flexibility and understanding and cultivating this culture of connection, not just results, but connection and community, regardless of location and whether or not people are physically co-located with each other or not. Because I think if there's one thing that we can all agree on, it's that navigating the new normal is also equating with leading through uncertainty. We may not have all the answers. We may not ever have all the answers, but our workers expect us to close the feedback loop, to listen to what their concerns are, maybe take action on some of their suggestions, close the loop when we can't take action, and also speak up for things that can advocate on their behalf. So I'm going to invite you just for a moment. We were going to do a poll, but I think I'll do a chat or come off mute. What do you think gets in your way from a practical perspective as a leader or a manager today when you're thinking about navigating all of the uncertainty, the tumultuous change that are going on in our workplaces, from workplace policies to resource constraints to shifts and restructuring in our organizations? What gets in your way when you're thinking about creating clear pathways to communicate with your workers? I'll put a few prompts here.
And everyone, somebody just asked in the chat, which is really a questions box, how do I use the chat feature? Just use the questions box that's at the top of your web page that has the little chat emoticon with the question mark. That's also a chat. Put your thoughts in there. Or, of course, not to pressure anybody, but if you want to raise that hand and be brave this morning, I'd love to call on you. While y'all are typing in the chat or thinking about raising your hand, I'll go ahead and weigh in for you, Mika. I would say I definitely struggle with the fear of saying the wrong thing when I'm working with teams and I'm representing my team or IFMA as a whole. I don't want to give misinformation, and sometimes that makes me give no information at all, which is definitely not the right way to go, but I'm sure others have experienced that too. Charlie, thank you for typing in the chat. Charlie says getting buy-in from leadership is what gets in his way.
Yeah, buy-in is so incredibly important. I think also the sense, and what I'm seeing from managers and leaders at any level, whether it's executive, middle, or even new, is that managers of people are feeling a little bit like they're disempowered as well. Like the control over making decisions that make sense at the team level is slowly being shifted out of their hands, but yet they're left with being responsible for picking up the pieces and still guiding their teams in the right direction. And that's a really big conundrum in today's workplace. I think when you assume a leadership role, again, I've worked in places like the U.S. Army, the U.S. intelligence community, very high level bureaucracies in the federal government. There's a pressure to appear certain, but often we may not have all the answers. Unclear ownership. We don't know necessarily who's making the decision, but how can we relay information to our teams that can put them at ease while still acknowledging the human pieces that when we don't know something, we just simply don't know. The other thing, though, that's interesting, Kylie, anything else coming in before I talk about overwhelm and info paralysis?
Nope, go ahead and move forward, Mika.
Yeah,
Well,
I
Mika,
think
I wanted to ask you a question right
absolutely.
there. And maybe it's probably what you're getting ready to talk about. I think with,
Mhm.
what I'm seeing, and, when I talk to other FMs, leaders with the rapid change, leadership sometimes is uncertain, and they aren't able to, they're overwhelmed and can't qualm, they can't seem to help you to navigate some of these waters. And so, which is what you're looking for. You're looking for that assistance in helping with the navigation, so you can explain to your teams when
That's
there's
right.
that gap. How do you, what do you do with that gap there?
Yeah, this is a definitely not atypical. And I don't care what industry you're working in, whether it's corporate, whether it's public sector, private sector. This is something that leaders everywhere are really struggling with. But I wanna take one piece of what you were saying, was that overwhelm piece, and it leads to information paralysis. But often we're getting too much information, but not of the right kind. It's not specific. It's not transparent. It's also not meaningful, and we can't see ourselves in it. And often it comes in one direction. It's like a town hall, maybe, or an all hands, or an email blast, or an employee newsletter. And there's no real way for us to make space to ask the hard questions and make sure that we're checking for understanding as well. And so when we're thinking about the tools that you can use from a practical perspective, when we think through the framework of the 3 C's, we need all 3 elements: clarity, communication, but not overwhelm, and then that connection piece. Because the connection piece, I'm gonna get to some practical tips to show you. The connection piece is what makes the message stick. It makes messages matter, even when you don't have all the answers. So some of the ways that this might work for you as a leader to lead with authentic communication when you don't have all the answers, when your leadership may not be as clear and direct as you're hoping for, is just to remind yourself that certainty isn't required. Your people want you to tell them what you know, what you don't know, and when you'll close the loop with more information when you have it. And that might need to be repeated again and again and again. But I really do believe that leaders that do this well also leave space for the feeling part, that connection part. And so, some tools that you can use when answers might not be final, but that you're still looking to build trust across your teams, is to ensure that you are not creating that information paralysis, meaning you're not waiting for the answers to come in before you communicate, because then you'd be adding to that as well. That uncertainty also leads to workplace stress, also leads to workplace anxiety, which can contribute to workplace burnout and affect how people work. So I would say to you to really lean in and think about, how can we normalize not knowing? People trust people who are transparent, genuine, authentic, and that connection piece. Again, the connection piece of the 3 C's, I believe, is the glue that puts it all together. It helps you stay human as a leader. It helps to close the loop, but also make people feel comfortable that you are acknowledging, even when you don't know something, that it does feel uncertain. It might not feel good to them, but that you promise you will update them with more information, and to leave space to listen. So remember, this is a really key part, right? People will always remember how you make them feel over what you say. So you don't want to have to wait for the right answer to be communicating with your teams, because your teams need you to lean in as a leader and as a manager. So I'm going to invite you to have another chat and maybe highlight of those 3 C's that we just talked about. So clarity, communication, frequency, but also connection. Which one do you feel your team, maybe even just you, need the most right now from your workplace? No right or wrong answer. You can tell me why though,
And
or come
Mika,
up with.
as oh, I like that. Come up with your own. Mika, as people are typing, I'm curious, which one do you feel like you or your team needs right now, or which one do you think you've had to highlight the most in your different careers?
I 100% believe it's the connection piece, because even without all the pieces of the puzzle together, connected teams drive results. Connected teams exhibit what I call instrumental assistance. They lean in and help each other out. It's that piece of employee engagement that's called discretionary effort. And it's the hardest thing to build for and design for as a leader. I don't care if your team is fully remote, if it's hybrid, one day a month, one day a year, or if it's 100% on prem. People are feeling less and less connected, and teams that don't have that social connection, those relationships established, often don't drive the same comparative results as teams that do. But what about you all? What do you think?
So Kiara said, I would say clarity because there is a
Mhm.
tendency for some groups to have private conversations that sort of
Mm.
telephone in quotes, telephone around, as opposed to the entire entity to be on the same page at the same time.
You know, that piece, that clarity piece is so incredibly important because, to your point, what ends up happening in workplaces is that the rumor mill spreads, right? And often those rumors are negative, and those ones are the ones that spread like wildfire. You know that when you have a positive, optimistic attitude, that kind of spreads, the energy is infectious, but same goes with negative. And when there's uncertainty in the middle, again, likely from that information paralysis where people don't have all the answers. So they tend not to communicate as frequently. That space leads to uncertainty and people will fill in the gaps. You're 100% on that one.
And then we also have clarity equals communication, which equals connection. I like that,
Yes.
Charlie.
Yes, Charlie. Yes, very good. They are all together, I think, equally weighted and important tenets of it. And so we're going to dig in a little bit deeper, but feel free to continue, ask your questions in the chat, or if you see something that worked well in your workplace that you think would be really valuable to help share across our community as we're navigating the conversation, please, please, please drop it in the chat too. And
Yes.
again, we're going to bake some time in at the end. Yeah.
And Randy also said clarity because of the constant changes and reorganizations.
Yes, constant. And people are really fearful. We talked about job seekers looking for other jobs, but let's face it, in our workplaces today, too, with the uncertainty of layoffs, restructuring, reorganization, back to office policies, changing in workplace and workforce. I mean, it is one thing that's, I think, equilibrium is that we are all facing a magnitude of change. In fact, I often say it's a once in a generation experience, the level and magnitude of change that we have experienced in the last 5 years. And you know what? People are a little bit traumatized. And that's why we really need to focus on those 3 C's to really cultivate this culture of connection, which is the human side of communication and leadership overall. I don't know about you, but what's happening in our workplaces today is that we are trying to bridge the gap in that human connection piece by coming together. We think that collaborating means meeting time. And do you know what it's costing our workplaces when we think of this death by meeting culture? I don't want to say death, but like innovation dies, creativity dies, burnout rises, attrition rises. It's costing our workplaces globally $37 billion a year in unnecessary and unproductive meetings. And here's the thing, our intent is good. We want to jump on a call with Charlie. We want Dexter to come and can we meet about this and hash this out? Can we whiteboard something? Let's grab a coffee. But it's also pulling people away from focus, and focused work is incredibly important when we're trying to drive results and also balance all of the other things that are important to us. Connection is important, but it can't only come from over meeting and over collaborating. And what's interesting is that even though many workplaces are focused on intentional design around bringing people together to try to build that, create that connection piece, employees are lonelier than ever. They are feeling isolated, again, disconnected, disengaged. And so some prompts to be thinking about, especially for you facility managers, but some prompts to be thinking about, and you can even invite your team to weigh in on this. And there's, again, no right or wrong answer. Maybe it's a drill in just hearing from people's perspectives by asking different kinds of questions, how they are feeling about work in general. Does your physical workspace invite interaction? Or is it a distraction? Do you allow time and schedule it in for fun and socialization during the workday? I'm not just talking about happy hours and lunch breaks, because that's taking more precious time out of people's other personal time. And sometimes people don't have the luxury of being able to participate in those after hours, after work socialization activities. Maybe they have caregiving responsibilities. Maybe they're volunteering in their communities. Maybe they're in the sandwich generation and they're actively parenting and actively caregiving. Maybe they have a hidden disability or medical condition that they don't necessarily want to disclose, but they have to go get help for after hours. And so that feeling of not being included if they're not able to opt into something that's after hours is making people feel even more disconnected. And just thinking about, how are we also integrating new hires and teaching them how to establish a network, not just with you, their direct supervisor, and their peers, the team members that they work with on a daily basis, but also outside of your team, outside of the nexus of their daily work. Who do they need to know and connect with to have information when they need it, to understand how career pathing works, to understand how the role and function of what they do on a daily basis connects with the larger mission of the organization? So these are just things to be considering as leaders in today's workplace. Because here's the kicker, and I'm sure this is no surprise, but people stay where they feel seen and supported. And that connection truly does fuel productivity and performance. And that's what all workplaces are looking for. So be thinking about how we can cultivate these relational sources of resilience through connection, through social activity, through humor, laughter, and fun. You know, top neuroscientists and leadership experts, this is even taught in Stanford University, understand that there is science behind teams that take brain breaks, that have laughter and joy, because you can do serious things without taking yourself too seriously in the workplace. When we do that, it helps us to take a step back when there is workplace conflict. It helps to navigate the stress of work surges, high priorities, uncertainty in the workplace. It helps us connect with that purpose. It's the human connection piece, really, that is a big driver in the 3 C's. But again, it's all of them integrated. So here's a place where you can start. And it might sound different for you, but feel free, if you have a question that might have worked nicely on your team, or maybe you participated in a conversation in the workplace where you were taken aback a little bit when someone asked you a question a little bit differently. But imagine if we were to take off our status updates, maybe just one a month, one a week, our team roundtables, our quick status updates that could be done asynchronously. And instead, we centered around a prompt where we invite our team to just think for a moment. Tell me about a time you felt energized this week. What's something you're proud of? What is your ideal, most productive way to work? Many people haven't even been asked that before. And what do you do to cope when you're feeling stressed? Maybe you could even ask it differently. What do you do when you see a team member that's a little bit stressed? And so these conversations start to normalize that sense of connection and build a culture that can lean in and communicate with clarity, with frequency, and where people feel like they can show up as their authentic selves too, but to do the work. It helps to restore human rhythm. It helps to create a bond. And it also helps to establish emotional intelligence and up your human side of leadership competencies. So just be thinking, anything coming in the chat, Kylie, I don't want to miss.
No, not right now. Nothing coming in the chat, but this is amazing, Mika. Definitely keep going. And if anybody has thoughts, please give them in the
Yeah.
chat.
In the government, people used to often consider what we teach today here in this conversation. Again, this is meant to be an interactive conversation. But these skills and competencies now need to happen even as individual contributors. So these aren't just for leadership. This isn't just for managers of people, but we need to create teams that have the competency and emotional intelligence to be able to check in on one another. Again, those teams that exhibit instrumental assistance lean in to help each other out when Kylie had to take off a few days unexpectedly because she was sick, but we still have a high priority deadline that we need to deliver. Or we're reorganizing and re-envisioning the workplace, and we have new equipment, being delivered on site, but I have to be out because guess what? My daycare provider isn't here. Teams that understand the need and to ask better questions so that you can get the work done together drive the most exceptional results. It does start with leaders to open the door, to demonstrate that human side, though. And these are just some different ways for you to be thinking about how you can shift from a managerial mindset to more of a coaching mindset. If we have any Ted Lasso fans in the virtual room with us today, I do a whole training session on leadership lessons from Ted Lasso. But if you think about Ted Lasso's approach, he infuses all of these 3 C's when he's coaching his team. And that team was not a winning team in the beginning. If you're familiar with Ted Lasso, I don't want to do any spoiler alerts. But by the way, the cast of Ted Lasso, the show, did in fact visit the White House. So if they are good enough to go to the nation's highest authority in the federal government and political government sphere, then I think it's appropriate to talk about it as a leadership competency. But Ted Lasso infuses transparency, being authentic, fun, humor, and laughter, not by punching down and making people feel bad, but by making people feel safe, that they can talk about the hard things, figure out how to run plays that work, get over the ego of someone who might be taking a little bit too much of the room. And these are teams that then, again, drive high performance everywhere.
Mika, Charlie said in the chat something that connects amazingly to what you just said. You should connect on a personal level. Don't always talk about work, but also talk about your interests outside of work,
That's
which
right.
I love that advice. I always try and talk about my coworkers' kids and their pets. I always try and make that effort because I know that that's what people truly care about. And why not ask them and open up that floor for them to talk about their personal lives?
That's so true. And, Charlie, what I've seen done really well by leaders who are starting to exhibit this human side of communication with the intent to create clarity and connect their teams is to start shifting meetings just a little bit differently. All the hybrid and remote work experts will tell you to think about restructuring your meeting times, even in terms of how you design meetings, from maybe 30 minutes to 20 to 25 minutes, from 60 to 45 to 50 minutes, so that you have a little buffer in between those meetings. But I've seen leaders also create moments that are explicitly for social connection before the actual meeting starts, but it's optional. So they start normalizing any meetings that, for instance, you would have control over scheduling. you could create a 25-minute meeting or a 45-minute meeting, but start the meeting earlier and even put in the agenda that for those who want to come early and have a little chat, please do. We'll do a little workplace trivia. We'll do a little round table. We'll talk about, our weekends. We'll connect over a favorite meal or coffee. I've seen leaders even just open a meeting and say, if we were meeting in a coffee shop today, if this was virtual, if we were meeting in a coffee shop today, what would we be drinking? What's your favorite drink? And work appropriate. And what would we be talking about? So finding common ground is a great way to establish a listening ritual and
And
learning each other.
yes, Randy even just said scheduling team feedback sessions. I like that idea.
Yes, I love that. I'd love to hear a little bit about how you structure your team feedback sessions. Are they weekly? Are you baking them into like when you're finishing projects? How does that look? Putting them on the spot. Well, here's a suggestion for how you might start. It's okay if you
And
want to take a moment.
he said quarterly.
Yeah, quarterly is perfect. I
We,
have seen, oh yeah, someone come on mute.
yeah, it's Dexter. I was just saying, for my team, and I lead an FM team who are extremely introverted. So a lot of times in meeting, traditional meeting settings, um, no one talks.
Yeah,
Everyone's quiet, right? And so what I try to do, similar to Randy, is quarterly have something like we'll have a barbecue or something like this, where people will just start chatting, as opposed to being in like a conference room, right? And talking to people, just being in a setting where people are a little more relaxed and they tend to
yeah.
talk a lot more.
I think that's great. And you bring up a good point. I've done a lot of strategy sessions with, the highest levels of leadership from the US Census Bureau to the intelligence community. You can imagine at the Census Bureau, let's say, we're talking about ethnographers, demographers, survey statisticians, math stats, data scientists who really care about the work and sometimes just need a little bit of push for the connection piece, like you said, introverted. Um, we started thinking about helping their leaders host not questions and answer sessions, but just a question sprint. So if we're launching a new initiative, maybe you have a new workplace policy that's coming out, maybe you're in the midst of a transformation or a change management program that you don't have all the answers to. Maybe you're initiating new AI tools in the workplace and it's going a little slow. Um, think about offering your team a ritual to just normalize asking questions without a need for response right away. And you're collecting the questions, including your own. Maybe you're whiteboarding the questions. Maybe you're even asking what happens if this doesn't work? What happens if this fails? What happens if it succeeds? But there's no answers needed during the question sprint, but you're giving people space who might not otherwise feel comfortable speaking up in front of others, especially if the message is being delivered in a larger meeting or let's say a town hall where your CEO is, announcing some new initiative. And you've seen this before. Here's our new 5 strategic priorities. We're counting on you to do this. Any questions? And it's crickets. And the CEO leaves and thinks that everyone's on board. Oh, I communicated that brilliantly. I was so clear. Everything was understood and everyone is aligned and on the right track. When really, maybe people needed a little space to think about it. Maybe they are processing it in different ways because people process different information and communication differently. So think about how you can start creating a listening ritual that really helps normalize collecting, like you said, feedback, but questions in a different way. And that will really enrich your solutions, inform what your team needs from you and the workplace to drive the results that are going to make a difference for everyone. The last thing I want to foot stomp when we're thinking about the 3 C's of change management is also just like, don't forget to celebrate. Don't forget the recognition, even when it's tiny and small. And also think about inviting, again, those skills that we often were considering soft skills back in the day. These are success skills in today's workplace. But think about how we can create a culture on your team where your team feels inspired to also give feedback. And maybe it doesn't have to be a formal recognition program or award program. It doesn't even have to be an employee spotlight of the week. Maybe it's a cheers for peers at the end of every meeting. Hey, I just want to say, when I was going through today's session, Kylie really helped step in and gave some suggestions that really helped enrich this project outcome. And I just want to let everybody know, good job, Kylie. And so think about what that means when the recognition isn't only coming top down, it's coming from all over. And the team feels like they also get rewarded for speaking up and saying, Randy did a great job, Mika did a great job, Dexter did a great job, and being specific around what it meant for the work, for the customer, for the outcome. So just a few thoughts, and then we can get away from our slides and just have a conversation for the rest of our few minutes. I know we only have a few minutes left, but I want to make sure that if you have any questions, this was just meant to be very high level. Again, a little trip around the world of work, but also then bringing it down to tactics and tools that you can use. This is from a book. It's actually called Burnout. And so Dr. Nagoski says, we thrive when we have a positive goal to move towards, not just a negative state we're trying to move away from. And that really resonated for me. I hope it does for you too, if you're thinking back to the first reflection prompt that I invited you to, which was to think about designing your workplace 2030, your cover story. And maybe think back to what that meant for you, or what it would look like for you in the year 2030. Again, what does your headline say? What story is it telling about you as a leader, your team, your workplace? And what did you do to change or create or to land on that publication, on that cover story? So I'm going to invite you to maybe drop into the chat. If you don't feel comfortable, you don't have to. Maybe just make a mental note about what's one small shift that you're leading with today from this conversation, from this interactive roundtable that we designed for you. Maybe it's something that you'll try. Maybe it's something that you'll try to say, or maybe it's just even thinking differently about how you might approach the 3 C's of workplace change because of our conversation. And I'm going to invite you to also give me feedback if you feel comfortable doing that. You can scan this QR code, and don't worry, if you don't know how to do it, it's super easy. You can take out your mobile device, open your camera, and you hold the camera prompt to this QR code, and then it should pop up with a URL that you can weigh in on. It will take less than 2 minutes, and it's completely anonymous. So if you liked some of this content, if you have feedback to give us, I always welcome that, because I think a growth mindset is also really, really integral for any leader in today's modern workplace. With that, I just want to say thank you so much for having me, and I will be more than happy. I'm going to go to the next slide too, where you can stay up to date with me. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me online. And also, let's open the conversation if you have anything else to add, or comments, or thoughts, or questions.
Hello, Mika. We do have one question right now from Tina. So thank you, Tina. She said, I periodically take my team to lunch, which worked well when everyone lived locally. I now have a person located in another state. I'm looking for additional ways for team building. My remote person is very introverted. What are your thoughts?
Good question. So I would first maybe invite everyone to weigh in. I don't know if you have like a polling tool or some way that you could collect like anonymous feedback. Maybe start there and just invite your team to give suggestions. That way you're collecting it from everyone, not just your remote employee. I might think about also, though, restructuring some of the questions that you're asking if you're doing one-on-ones with your remote employee to figure out what might resonate for that person. So I've seen things like, so instead of taking them to lunch, maybe you send a Starbucks or their favorite coffee card, or maybe they have a favorite lunch spot in their location and actually get it delivered. We did that at Flex Jobs. So we had virtual lunch together, but everybody had a lunch delivery when I had a fully remote team at the time. And we still made time to connect 20 minutes or less. We were eating, and then we had some fun prompts that were put up. Some other things that come to mind are to think about, having a fun, like it could be a trivia session online where you're actually asking questions about the work and how people feel aligned, but in the spirit of fun. Sometimes it could be like a history lesson. It could be maybe like a Venn diagram of your customers, that sort of thing. But if there's one piece of advice I would leave you with is that you want to keep it optional. And so maybe some of the team building efforts that you're putting together are meant for, even though you're co-located with the rest of your team, are meant to be done all together virtually. And you create space for having them be optional, different days of the week, different time zones, different time frames are important, and people will start to gravitate. I have seen things like 20-minute mentoring Monday session where teams will volunteer topics that they want to learn about, like how do we get promoted around here. You think people know, but maybe they don't. Or do you know all the benefits that you have available? Have you heard of the employee assistance program? Little micro moments for connection, but together time. I have seen work teams do things like put together candid conversations when things in the world feel pretty heavy, just to have a space for people to, in a, of course, work appropriate manner, come and just acknowledge like feelings or challenges. Some people who are parents or caregivers can connect on that level in terms of resources during the summertime for their children. So there are a lot of different ideas and suggestions. And if you want, you can reach out. I'd be happy to customize some for you as well based on your team composition.
That was great, Mika. I have to say this makes me feel so grateful to work at
Um,
IFMA because so many of the things that you just said, we already do. We have a great company culture. It makes me love coming to work every day. Um,
that
so,
is so good to hear, I have to say. Good job, Ifma.
yeah, good job, IFMA. Well, Mika, before I turn it over to Dexter to close us out, I want to say thank you. It was so just eye-opening to work with you, to see this presentation, to pick your brain and get your thoughts. Everybody, Mika is the real deal, and I hope that you saw that during this presentation. So feel free to reach out to her. I know she'll get you any help you need, answer any questions. And thank you so much for joining us today. And Mika, thank you for your time. I'm going
Thank
to invite
you.
Dexter to close us out now.
Mika, just to reiterate some of Kylie's comments, we really appreciate you coming today and talking to us. I mean, learning about the three C's. I had, when I first, heard about the three C's, I said, oh, well, what's this, right? And then I was really interested in hearing what you had to say. Learned a lot about it. I think my takeaway is communication, right? And
Mm,
how to have effective communication, right? And finding those touch points where you can get people to just kind of relax and share with you, right? And so, and it's bi-directional. So thank you so much. We've learned a lot, and I hope you look forward to the overwhelming response and people reaching out to you and that sort of thing. It's okay for folks to reach out to you directly.
absolutely. Please, please. I'm a master connector. Reach out anytime. I'm happy to share resources. It's my favorite thing to do.
So I want to thank everyone for joining today, and we look forward to seeing you at our next Wednesday webinar series. And so everyone have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye bye now.